David Reinbacher, Juraj Slafkovsky, 2 top 5 draft selections taken in 2 consecutive years on the course for 2 different paths of development. Which one's the right one? Training camp cuts continued en masse last weekend. We saw almost half of the Canadiens' training camp roster slashed. Some guys going on waivers, all of who have cleared, and also a big group of guys being reassigned to the Laval Rocket, who started their training camp this week as well. The Canadiens won their 5th preseason game, their first one on the road on Monday night in pretty big fashion, with the captain getting it done very early in overtime, coming back from a 3-1 deficit. And now the team is off to Montreal for a little bit of team bonding, team building activities, some more practice prior to their final exhibition game of the season, which will take place on Saturday night in Ottawa. Now, part of those cuts that happened over the weekend was this year's number 5 overall draft selection, young defenseman David Reinbacher. He was cut, as was mostly expected for it to happen, and sent back to his team in Switzerland, where he will spend the rest of this season. Now, last year, if you remember, with the Canadiens having the first overall selection, taking Juraj Slafkovsky, choosing him over the ever-popular pick of Shane Wright. And the hot debate at the time was whether or not Juraj Slafkovsky should slot right into an NHL lineup, or if perhaps he should go back to Europe or spend some time adjusting to the North American game with the Laval Rocket in the AHL. Well, we certainly now know what that decision was. So today, we're just going to take a look at these 2 prospects, the courses that they've been put on for their development, which look completely different, and also talk a bit about whether or not it's the right move for Juraj Slafkovsky. If you're new here, hi, my name is Amy Johnson. I'm a correspondent for Rocket Sports Media, and if you're looking for all of our daily Montreal Canadiens, Laval Rocket, and Habs prospects coverage, you can find that all in one place at the Hockey News Montreal team site. You can find us thn.com/Montreal. It's right there on your screen, thn.com/Montreal. So development looks different for every single hockey prospect. It's just the name of the game. Development is a very individual thing. And while the ideals of development can look the same overall for an organization, how that is handled with each individual player usually looks very different. But when we're talking about first-round draft picks, and particularly top 5 and first overall draft picks, does that order of selection automatically mean you get a ticket to the NHL? Well, I don't think it does, and I don't think it should. The way to set a hockey prospect up for success is to make sure that that prospect is ready to make the leap to the show. And no matter where they're drafted, 1st round or 7th round, that level of preparedness is going to be different and take a different amount of time and a different scenario for development for each and every one of them. Immediately upon the Canadiens selecting David Reinbacher 5th overall this year, it was more of a consensus, and I certainly agreed. David Reinbacher should not spend this first season as part of the Canadiens organization playing in the NHL. He should go back to Switzerland. It's a competitive league. He'd be playing against men and getting good experience, honing his skills and getting stronger. And from what we've seen from David Reinbacher at development camp, at rookie camp, and at training camp, cutting him at this stage and sending him back to Switzerland with a list of, okay, here's what we need you to work on, is exactly the right thing for the Montreal Canadiens to do. And I think next year, if we fast forward 12 months, we are going to see, hopefully, a stronger, more mature game out of David Reinbacher when he comes back to training camp next year. Juraj Slafkovsky is a bit of a different case. He's a 1st overall selection. And that comes with a whole set of different expectations and hopes and potential for any franchise, and particularly a franchise like the Montreal Canadiens that's already under such a microscope because of its large and passionate fan base. Last year, when the Canadiens selected him first overall, after the shock wore off, after the fan base and media members warmed up to the idea of this prospect and what he could potentially bring, the big debate was then, okay, does he come straight to the NHL, or should there be a different path for Juraj Slafkovsky? It's one thing. Connor Bedard this year, it's a no-brainer. Of course he's going to start in the NHL. Austin Matthews was the same thing. Connor McDavid was the same thing. There are certain players that you know are destined to go straight to the NHL. There are others that it's obvious that you should take the gamble on them, and sometimes it pays off. Other times they struggle a little bit, and it takes them a season or two or more to really get warmed up. In fact, if you look at the list of first overall draft selections for the last 10 years, listen to these names. So Connor Bedard, Juraj Slafkovsky, Owen Power, Alexis Lafreniere, Jack Hughes, Rasmus Dahlin, Nico Hischier, Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, and Aaron Ekblad. So there's a little bit of, it's kind of all over the place. A lot of those guys went straight to the NHL. That's kind of the norm for the first overall draft selection. And some of them kind of hit it out of the park right out of the box. Owen Power was one example of someone who didn't go straight to the NHL. Instead, he went to the NCAA, and for all intents and purposes, spending a season playing college hockey was the right choice for Owen Power, and certainly didn't set him back in any kind of way. I was vocal at the time a year ago saying, I don't think you should put Juraj Slafkovsky right in the NHL, particularly in a market like Montreal. My choice for him, I didn't think that he needed to go back to Europe. Like I truly believe that David Reinbacher is going to be well served by the fact that he's going to Switzerland. But instead, I was in the camp of send Juraj Slafkovsky to the Laval Rocket. That way he's 20 minutes down the road. They can keep a good eye on his development, but he has kind of the breathing room in the AHL to adjust to the North American game. And you can make call-ups once in a while during the season to kind of do just a bit of a litmus test. Let's see how he's doing in his progression. Let's see how he handles the speed and the strength and those types of things when it comes to NHL play, and give him that space to adjust. Okay, so that didn't happen. No big deal. It wasn't what I would have selected, but hey, I'm not in the hockey operations department for the Montreal Canadiens. But his rookie season didn't wow anybody. You can't write it off because he spent half the season injured. He played 39 games. And in those 39 games, did you realize and recall that he only registered 4 goals and 6 assists? Let's do the math together. That's roughly a quarter of a point per game. That's nowhere near the kind of output and production that a first-round draft selection needs to put on the ice, much less a first overall. There were obvious things that Slafkovsky struggled with last season. So after a summer of working on those things, rehabbing the injury, did he come into camp and just storm the door and blow everyone out of the water? Well, let's be honest. No. Yes, Juraj Slafkovsky has had an improved camp this year as opposed to last year. There are places where you definitely can see some improvement in his decision making, in the physical components of his game, things of that nature. But there are still a lot of areas that he needs to work on. There are times that he doesn't look confident on the ice. There are times that he's out of position. There are times that he doesn't look really sure about the decisions that he's going to make, or his decision making isn't quick enough. He certainly has difficulty winning puck battles still. there's work to be done. And hey, that's completely expected and warranted. The kid's 19 years old. He only played 39 games in the NHL last season. There's a lot for him to learn. On the Press Home podcast about a week and a half ago, the September 26th show, I had a 5-minute monologue on why I believed Juraj Slafkovsky this season should start the season in the American Hockey League. I think that it would be the best for his development. And I was pleasantly surprised to see Nick Kypreos on Monday night's Sportsnet broadcast of the Habs Leafs game. In the second intermission, Nick Kypreos basically said the exact same thing. Here's the quote that he had. Two things that Nick Kypreos said, and I quote, "You do have a sense that this guy is not ready for the NHL." And he went on to analyze a play that had happened in the first or second period of the game where Slafkovsky completely misread the play. He did double coverage on a Leafs player and left Austin Matthews completely by himself. Austin Matthews took that opportunity to put the puck right in the back of the net. And Kypreos summed up his analysis by saying, quote, "This is the stuff that tells me that this guy should start in the American Hockey League." Now, no one is saying, Elliot Friedman went on to say, there's some people out there that are calling this guy a bust already. And no, we're not doing that. But you also can't say, oh, but he's a first overall draft pick. Just lay the red carpet out for him straight into the NHL and he's just magically going to make it happen. Well, you can't have those unrealistic expectations either. Here's my suggestion for Juraj Slafkovsky. And I don't care. Canadiens management decided to keep him in the NHL last year. Great. So what? That was a decision they made last year. They have an opportunity to make a different decision this year. And in a year that is supposed to be all about development, the future of this young core of the Montreal Canadiens forward group, the future of building this team during this, they don't want to use the word rebuild anymore, but the future of building this team back up to be a perennial Stanley Cup contender completely depends on being able to properly and solidly develop the players that are supposed to be the top end of your future core. The best way, in my opinion, to set Juraj Slafkovsky up on the right path in the short term to do that, start him off in the AHL this year. And I'm not saying for the whole year. There are some people saying that he should spend the whole year in the AHL. I'm not on that train. You sit down and have a heart-to-heart with him and you say, we want you to play freely. We want you to come in here and bang the door down and be formidable every single night. And we think the way that you can do that is if we send you to Laval for maybe a month or less, depending on how quickly things really pick up speed. You send him down, you give Jean-Francois Houle and the Laval coaching staff specific instructions. Here's how we want him deployed every night. And here are the areas that we want you to specifically work on with him. And if you do it in such a positive way, he goes down. The AHL is there for this purpose. It's the development league for the NHL. This is where he has the room to make the mistakes. The pressure is off quite a bit. The spotlight is still pretty bright, but not as glaring as it is in the Bell Center and in the NHL. And he has room to make mistakes and learn. And with a kid of Slafkovsky's talent and size and skill, there's going to come a time when he starts dominating in the AHL. And I think that Slafkovsky could make that happen sooner rather than later. I think that it wouldn't take very long. And then when he's at a point that every night that he goes out on the ice, he's just absolutely killing it for the Laval Rocket and he is just shredding the opposition. That's the point that you recall him back to the Montreal Canadiens, and then you deploy him, you put him out on the ice, and suddenly he's going to be like a brand new hockey player because he's not going to be overthinking it. He's not going to be worrying about making mistakes. He's going to be bursting with confidence like, oh, I've got this. And then maybe we see the Juraj Slafkovsky that was drafted first overall in the 2022 NHL draft that could turn into a superstar for the Montreal Canadiens. If you'd like to read more of an in-depth analysis of what I've just said here, I actually wrote a feature article on this for the Hockey News this week. You can find it at thn.com/Montreal. It's called Should Canadiens Slafkovsky Spend Time in Laval? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Leave your comments down below. Do you think Juraj Slafkovsky would be best served, and not just Slafkovsky, the Canadiens overall? Do you think that he and the organization would be best served by having him spend a little bit of time in the AHL at the start of this season? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hey, before I finish out this video, if you have a moment and you've liked today's episode and you'd want to see more like it every week, just take a moment and tap that subscribe button, hit the like button. Always tap that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. And if you could help us out by sharing this episode on your social media platforms, we would greatly appreciate it. And hey, this was one of just 10 burning questions that Rick Stevens and Michael Spinella touched on this past week on the Canadiens Connection podcast. Basically, the Slafkovsky question they answered was, will he realize, some of his potential this year? But they laid out 10 really hot questions that need to be answered this season in terms of the team's rebuild. If you missed that podcast, well, you're in luck. We have it right here on our YouTube channel. Click on this video to watch that. Leave your comments, and see you back here again next week.